It's Madam Anza. Thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate you. If you have a deck with you, I encourage you to get your deck out now. And this first session, we're going to be working with the second half of the majors. For those of you that were with us last week, we did a bit of a speed date with the major arcana from the Fool through the Hanged Man. So today we're going to start with our old friend, the Devil. You want to separate those out while I do my sort of boilerplate standard introduction. So hi! I'm Madam Anza. I am the hardest working woman in show business, and I'm the creator of the World Spirit Tarot. And that is this handy dandy deck. Here it is. Boom. This deck, I am proud to say, is noted for its inclusivity and representation. So this deck is noted for its representation. That's really important to me. And I encourage you, whatever deck you are using or whatever deck you decide to have in the future, representation matters. So find a tarot deck that not only speaks to you artistically, but shows you the world the way that you think it should be, which is to say with a diversity of folks, whatever that means for you. Maybe all your folks are cat people. Anyway, so my deck is now in its second edition. It'll be coming out in its third edition. The Saints provide next year. It was supposed to be this year, but given the state of things, I thought I would just let this year settle itself out. So we are in the second week of this series. We're doing the second half of the majors today, and in the second section today, starting at 8 o'clock, we're going to get into some very interesting new material I have never covered before. I'm happy to share with you about working with the people cards. As always, if you have any questions, you can drop them in the comments, and we will do a bit of a question and answer at the end. So there we go. All right, moving on. Now, if you've got your deck, what I'll be doing today is I'll be working with the Rider-Waite deck and showing you those images, my own deck, and then the Light and Shadow, which is just another deck, the art of which I really appreciate. You may have very different imagery in the deck that you may have with you, and that's just fine. The tarot is an evolving tradition. It evolves to meet the needs of the times and the needs of the people. So you may have different images, and you can just make a note for yourself about how they're similar and how they are different. So today, the very first card we're going to start with is actually the Death card. So, alrighty. So here's the Death card in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. That is the best known deck of this century. I'll hold that up for you right there. I wish that we had a whole class just to talk about the imagery, but you can see here it is very much a product of the times. This deck has everything to do with the fall of people as well as institutions. You can see here that there are nobles and clerics, and everyone is brought low by change. Technical people, things are happening. Here's the Light and Shadow version, which is very lively and very busy. Love this art. And here's my version. In my case, I wanted to offer some representation that was, I don't know if hopeful is the word, but focuses a bit more on the positive and transformational aspects of the card. The Death card rarely in a reading comes up as a card of actual physical death. Generally, when this card comes up, it is there speaking to radical and much needed change in your life. Again, which is why in my card, I really wanted there to be this feeling of, you can see there's so much tumult and emotional processing of this painful transition. And, you know, again, it may be a relationship, it may be a job. When this card comes up in a reading, you're usually not surprised. It is the inevitable closure of a long situation. That is the thing that comes before positive change. So if you have anything different in your cards, feel free to drop that in the comments. We'll try to talk about it at the end. This card does, usually it comes up for you when you're going to be feeling something really intense. As I said, not usually a surprise. It is what I call the compost principle. It is inevitably the thing that rots and breaks down in order to make way for new life. So the Death card. Interestingly, right after death, we find ourselves with Temperance. Here's the traditional rendering of the Temperance angel. See there with the rainbow and so forth. This card, interestingly, here's the Light and Shadow version. A little bit more whimsical behind the back, as it were. And my version of this card, they all represent this sort of gigantic Angel. Now, I had always thought of temperance as the no drinking version, as in like a temperance as a form of sobriety or almost severity. But in fact, of course, it has to do with the tempering of things, as in moderating and finding a livable balance. So when the temperance card comes up, it is typically saying, seek good counsel, find the way and place that you can compromise without being compromised. How can you be authentic to yourself and step away from any gratuitous drama? Obviously, confront, evil doing if that's what needs to be done. But if it's just a matter of skirting around other people's process because it's not relevant to you, Temperance card encourages you to do that. It is about cultivating moderation. So it is not that sort of prohibition era version of temperance, which is purportedly some radical severance, but rather it's more about finding equilibrium. It is a card of personal alchemy, let's say. I happen to love that card. And I would say for me, the most valuable insight into it ever for me was this notion that it has to do with compromise. Let us step onto our friend, the Devil, a much maligned card in the deck. Here's the Rider-Waite art, very traditional, not actually my favorite, but it is intended to partner with the Lover's card, which we talked about a bit in the last session. So you can, if you've got those two in the Rider-Waite deck, you may want to put them together. There's that traditional image. This one is a little jazzier. I wish that I could hold this up for you for a long time so you can see how good this art is. So the Light and Shadow deck, let me take a moment to promote this deck. Brian Williams and Michael Gepford, I believe, made this deck. And the artist grew up in Germany in a very matriarchal home environment and became a fan of linoleum block art, which is the same medium that I use to make my deck. And that's part of what really drew me to this. It's an interesting opportunity to see another way to use the same medium for the same material to very different effect. So there's there. Here's my version. In this case, the Devil card. This card comes up for addiction, obsession, denial, basically, what we would jokingly refer to as too much Christmas. Anything can be a good time until you've been doing it for too long and then it's no longer fun. So in this case, rather than the sort of, what's the word? I would say that this Devil is telegraphing his ill will through his appearance and what is obviously intended to be a somewhat grotesque appearance. Most people don't wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I should develop a nice destructive habit today. I should really lean into something that's going to ruin my life and the life of those around me. But this guy, being sort of more the sexy Lestat type, as it were, to me was a better representation of that notion of like, come on, it'll be fun, just lean into your destructive impulses. So I wanted to create a different way to represent that same notion of becoming overcome by what they might say your baser impulses. I've done a whole class on the Devil card, the sympathy to the Devil card. I think there's a lot to be explored there because it says so much not only about how we approach, again, moderation. You'll notice that the Temperance card and the Devil card are close to each other in the deck. But it also offers a lot about how we, coming out of a sort of Puritan culture here in the West, how we look at our bodies and by extension, our relationship with the earth. So there's a lot to be done there. The Devil card is not all bad, but he generally talks about, is it just a good time on a Saturday night or have you actually begun on the path to perdition? And whatever you're doing, is it worth it? Will it be worth it in the long run? That's what he has to say. Now, while we're going down this road of very exciting dramatic cards in the deck, let's go to the Tower. Ta-da! Also known historically as the lightning-struck Tower. Boom, you can see here we have some people with crowns and so forth being knocked from their vaunted vista. This literally is a card of the mighty brought low. It is a radical and unexpected change of perspective. As the Death card typically comes up in a reading to speak to a change that you may not have wanted to look in the eye, and yet in your heart of hearts you knew was coming, the Tower card generally is here to say you did not see that coming. And as a nice aside, someone made a lovely internet meme that is a tarot deck entirely made of this card for 2020, and it's called Oops, All Towers. because this is definitely the part where we admit that we are all entering the tower times, a time of great transition of the mighty brought low and a shift of perspective for us all. So there's that. Here's the light and shadow version. Interestingly, I'll try to lean in close and hope that you can really see on top of this sort of, sort of ziggurat almost. They've got, there is the tower. It's like the Eye of Sauron, but it's also a bird. You could spend a lot of time working on the symbolism of this card. So dynamic. And here's my version. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in there. I have a tendency to be a bit of a deluge of information myself. We actually have fewer cards to cover this week. I pushed through the Hanged Man last week, so this time we have a little bit more time if you would like to get some discussion. When I made my version, I wanted it to be different, as if this card represents your perspective as the person getting knocked off the tower. All of the other ones are sort of being seen as if there was a camera crew that happened to be there at that moment. In this case, this is you, because when this card comes up, it is often our personal experience. It's catastrophic events, it's bad luck, it's the economy going to shit, it's bad timing in your life that just somehow, as we wrote in our book, brings you the unwanted blessing of a radical change in perspective. The reversals of fortune bring hardship, but they also unmask denial. One of the folks who has taken this class with me in the past, she said, "Oh, I love getting the Tower card. I know you're supposed to, react with dread and fear." She's like, "I'm always thrilled for the unmasking. I always want to know what it is that I'm not seeing. Please tell me, because now I have the information." So Jessica Godino, who co-wrote the book with me for my deck, Jessica said, "The way down from the tower is full of surprises." I love that. All right, let us move to the star. And also, control person, if you would just give me a sense of when we get to the half of the hour, when it's 7:30, because then I start to wrap it up and we can do the talking part, the discussion part. Now we're going to go to the star. The star took me a minute to understand as a person learning tarot. That is in part because some cards are very complex. Again, you could write a whole book about the devil card, right? It's got a lot going on. There's a lot of baggage. There's a lot of imagery. The star card is one of these cards that, while it is profound, it's not super complicated. It is the giant star heart emoji from the universe. When the star card comes up, it typically describes healing and calming after strife. Clearly, if you are walking through the deck, by now you just went through the devil, the tower, death, a lot of transition. So this is the healing and calming. Inspiration, a renewal of optimism, renewed empathy and compassion for others, probably bought in part by your hard-fought experience. So when this card comes up, it suggests be revitalized, reminded that love and creativity are not finite, but they are boundless. The only thing that may be finite for you in this time and place is the energy to pursue those things. And the star says, take care of yourself and maybe you'll have some more energy to do it. And the more that you choose to give, the more you may choose to receive. So there's the traditional image of it. This card will actually be redone in the next edition of my deck, and I'm very excited about the imagery. Here's this one. This one's almost a little Harlequino, kind of wild and crazy. And here's mine, the star. You can see there's a lot of water imagery in here. A little bit of the Stella Maris, star of the sea. Inspiration. Look at it too long and you'll have to run and pee because there's so much water in there. Now, let us move to the moon. In the last half of the Fool's Journey, which is that walk from the 0 to 21, as we talked about the last time around. In this last half, we've seen a lot of great turmoil. We also see a lot of celestial cards come up. There is, in fact, the star, the moon, the sun, and the world. So we, having gone from the star, let us now go to the moon. Boom, boom, boom. I've been working on a version of this as well. This card has a lot of layers of symbolism. Dreams and daydreams, bring messages from your deep mind and the collective unconscious. Intuition and introspection have answers for you during this time. Sometimes it's inspiring and sometimes it's frightening, but this card suggests, with the dog representing your domesticated self, your conscious, sort of civilized wisdom, as it were, and the wolf representing your wild and intuitive self, try to bring those things together in order to move forward. The moon is another card that has a lot of cultural baggage. Here's this one. This one is such a jolly, clearly like alpine village. Look how cute that is. Instead of those sort of severe towers of Mordor that the last card had, this one is like a cute little village. And mine is more of a southwestern version. There you go. Most versions of the moon card have, again, this notion of towers, that you're sort of out there on the edges of civilization or consciousness, as it were. Again, we've got the moon, we've got the two canids representing our intuitive and our civilized selves. And then there's often, hopefully you can see it in this one, if you look down in the bottom, whatever card you have, you may see some sort of a crustacean rising up. Sometimes it's a turtle or a crab or in my case, it's like a lobster. Some kind of creature coming up out of the water. Again, that represents in the tarot typically messages coming from your deep mind. The moon card has a lot of baggage because in a lot of the old readings, it would come up as representing the dark, the unknown, because of the resurgence, I would say, because of feminism and the resurgence of sort of neo-paganism and witchcraft and so forth. We have a lot of really adorable associations for the moon and go, oh, it's the moon card, I feel represented. The reason that it comes up as a card of challenge in the past is because with the moon, as you may know, you can be looking at a well-lit field in the moonlight and think you know what the ground is doing. But in fact, you may not know when something is a shadow and when it is a puddle. Right, you don't know what you're stepping in the moonlight necessarily, because while some senses are heightened, others are limited. So the moon card comes up to say that there may be unseen aspects of the terrain or unseen forces at work. So you can bring all of your affirmative sort of moon energy to the card, but just know that it does also speak to this notion of the things at work that are not seen. If you have questions about that, feel free to reach out. We are going to jump now from the moon to the sun. Thank you. Here's the sun. We're making good time. So often this is some form of, usually a naked blonde child sitting on a white horse. I'm not quite sure how they arrived at that imagery, but everything about it pretty much says outdoor hot festivity. It's a joyful card, but please get that kid some sunblock. If anyone out there that happens to be watching has the original edition of my deck, I apologize, because that is the one card in the deck that I feel that I did not do well. The second edition has a much better version, as I'll show you in a second. The reason being that I had never really drawn children before, and the proportions of young people are different. And so what you have there may be a little bit of a strange picture. This person clearly felt the same way because they made a completely different representation of the sun and really made it about a conscious source of light. Now, this card is generally intended to invoke celebration, joy, freedom, festivity after challenge. It's like if the star card said healing, the moon card said do some evaluating and rebalancing of yourself. The sun card is really like, good on you. It's basically a card of unbridled celebration. One of the old texts says it is the card of benediction. So here you can see what I like to think is a much better version of my card. It is very much in the traditional vein, but I hadn't drawn a unicorn in 30 years and it was very fun. This card is all about re-embracing that optimism and new vitality and socializing and connecting with as they say, connecting with the earthly joys and the healthy pleasures available to you in this time. Which, of course, during this time in history, you may be thinking, what even is that? It may just be, hygge. It may be like cuddling around the fire as the seasons change. It may be, taking a walk at a distance, with a friend, so you can at least be together and be outside, literally in the sun, getting that vitamin D that helps us to fight the seasonal sads. This card says, do that. the clothing optional part is entirely optional. So from here, we only have 2 more cards left in the deck. If nobody has questions to throw in at the end, then I will talk a little bit more about the Fool's Journey, because we covered that last week and not so much this week. Going from the Sun, now we go to the Judgment card. I have opinions about the Judgment card. And I think that, I'm sure that viewers have a different relationship with these concepts, depending if you grew up in like a Judeo-Christian sort of people of the book culture, or if you grew up completely outside all of that stuff. As a person who did not grow up in it, the Judgment card, the traditional card, is kind of creepy. It's not intended to be, but it just comes across that way. So here we see the angel blowing the horn, bringing the worthy, resurrecting them from the dead. Presumably it's like the last judgment, and they are flying away to their, to their just desserts. But for anybody who didn't grow up with that notion of people bodily rising from their tombs to go receive their just desserts for life well lived, and grew up rather in the, zombies are always in the TV generation, this card is a little strange, with the little naked gray baby rising up out of the ground. So while in its time, this deck was made about 100 years ago, I'm sure that the average viewer would have completely understood where they were coming from with this card. To me, it's one of those cards that needs to change with the times in order to be intuitively received by many of the people who might be pulling this card. That being said, like, what is this card even about? The concept of judgment. At its best, the Judgment card comes up when you either have some sort of enormous decision, like a tremendous decision that requires you to reckon with and resolve some things in your past. It's basically about reckoning with your past and getting ready to move forward into the future. Do you need to make amends? Do you need to make apologies? Do you feel good about the proverbial eulogy that you would get moving from the past into your imminent future? So it's really about, if today is the first day of the rest of your life, what do you want it to be? Would you like to be a zombie? This artist, again, from the Light and Shadow Tarot, which has a good book with it, by the way. I recommend it. It's a small book, but it's worth having. They basically riffed on the same theme. Their people just look a little more, I would say, a little bit more zesty about rising from the grave. And there's more to talk about with this card, but we'll do that next time. So my version, interestingly, I'm saying that the imagery needs to be updated. And to do that, I went back 5,000 years. In my version, I went for a different kind of judgment. Here we have Anubis, or an Anubis, depending how you pronounce it, doing the weighing of the souls. As you perhaps are aware, in some iterations of the Egyptian afterlife, the notion was that no person passed judgment on you per se. It wasn't a matter of words, but they literally weighed your heart, or your spirit in this case, to a feather. And they needed to balance out. In other words, you didn't have a lot of bad actions sort of glommed onto you in a cosmic way. I'm sure the Egyptians had better language for it. But you wanted to make sure that you weighed next to the feather of truth. So you can see there's Anubis just doing their job, man, very workmanlike. It's entirely a matter of how you, the decisions that you've made, not anybody telling you whether you did or didn't fit the dogma. So, see, dog, Anubis. Anyway, that's how I worked with that notion of evaluation. So, this card can come up to say, what is your vocation? What is your inner calling? What are you going to do with your life now? What if today is the first day of the rest of your life? What kind of person are you, or what kind of person would you prefer to be? So, the Judgment card. And now we come to what in most traditional decks is the last card. Has all kinds of names. Typically, it's called the World. Here's Pamela Coleman Smith's version. We see the figure, presumably she is the universe. She's holding some rods. She's wearing a rather festive scarf. We see the 4 animals in the corners that traditionally represent, is it Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? And in Tarot, to my mind, I reinterpreted those to represent earth, air, water, and fire, the elements. So there's the universe, or the world card. Here's this version. They really made it sort of a more sort of primally pantheistic. We see what is sort of the cosmic mother. Those animals, the elementals, are still represented in the corners. She's got the world turtle and then the bebe. This reminds me of the amazing artwork. If you'd like to take away some homework from this, go look up Nina Paley, Nina-Paley, who's an incredible animator, and you may be familiar with her work once you see it. She has an incredible movie that she made called Seder, S-E-D-E-R, Masochism. Don't be scared. It's a riff on sadomasochism and Seder, the Jewish holiday, the Jewish ritual. She grew up in that tradition, and it is really about her adventures as an animator and a member of a family, and the exploration of sort of patriarchy and the old religions that held women as at least equal, if not connected to the cosmic mother. The art is amazing, and this perhaps will remind you of it. Here is my version of the world. This in my next deck is actually going to be called the universe, because universe is bigger. So basically the same thing, but it made sense to me, this notion of the universe. I wanted her to be bigger. And again, representation is so important to me. In the cards, I wanted to see, a really voluptuous body type to embody this notion of the biggest thing that we could conceive of. At the time the cards were invented, back in the back, of course, that was the world. Everybody thought everything sort of just rotated around that. Our understanding now is so much bigger. I imagine in the future, the decks will have the multiverses. It will be the next cards as our future descendants' understanding of the universe gets bigger to become the multiverse. So that this card tends to come up to speak to the completion of a cycle of growth. She is doing the dance that says, I got my diploma, I learned that skill, I got it worked out. It is a card of victory, fulfillment, completion, wholeness, mastery. When this card comes up, long-standing issues are likely to be resolved. Something ends, and then you start all over again with the bright hope and the naivete of the Fool. If you have all of your major cards out, tonight, when all of these sessions are over, I would love to encourage you to clear some space on your table or your bed or your rug, whatever you want. Get them all, and in most decks they are numbered from 0 to 21, and in my deck they will be in the next edition. Lay them out from Fool all the way around and let it come back to the universe, like 22 spaces on a clock. The Fool, if you think about that toddler taking their first steps of wonder into the world, they get to the Magician, they begin to learn something about mastery of the self and the physical skills. They get to the High Priestess, and they begin to learn something about having both an inner life and an outer life. They come to the Empress, and they realize, oh, hey, I've got a body that I'm in, and there are other people, like the mother figures. They get to the Empress, the Emperor, and they go, oh, there's outer structures. There's things to learn. There's put down the seat when you're done. There's wash your hands. All of these sort of things that represent the civilizing impulses, the agreements that we make in order to live together and have sustainable infrastructure. That entity, that Fool, moves through this whole cycle of dealing with learning virtues and ethics and love and balance and temperance and grief and loss and healing, and comes back around to being the universe, where they have done a full cycle of learning. Of course, none of us just stop right there, just disappear as soon as we've, got our black belt in life experience. Hopefully you step off and say, well, now I'm ready to learn the next thing. I know that some of the folks watching this class right now are already masterful in other areas. Masters in dance, masters in craft, masters in education. And yet here you are trying to learn something new. You yourself have decided to step from that certainty and clarity of accomplishment and status that the universe card or the world card represents, and step into the Fool and begin a whole new cycle of learning. There's a wonderful, thank you. There's a wonderful artist and author named Alan Moore, who has he wrote a series, I think it's called Promethea. It's a graphic novel, and it's, you have to be interested in superhero sort of mythic adventure to probably want to spend a lot of time in there. But the important part is that he does a whole walkthrough of the Fool's journey in the context of this graphic novel. It was, as a person who spent a lot of time thinking about that journey, it was wonderful to see it so deftly illustrated for people in a way with visuals. I can tell you what it means, but it's really great to see somebody who's so capable of looking it up. So you may want to, for your further researches, look into Alan Moore's Promethea, see if you can find that visual. Do I have any questions out there from anybody about the specifics of the cards we covered today? Pop them in there, and otherwise I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how you might work with these cards in a reading. We'll use that time, and then when he gives me the eyeball, we'll wrap things up, take a quick break, and open the next session. So, okay. So, you have probably been making fastidious notes or listening as you're multitasking and thinking, well, that's great. Now I know what all these cards mean, or maybe it's jogged your memory because you already knew and you just needed a refresher. So what, major cards? What happens with the major cards? If you want to use them in a tarot reading, if that's your focus, there are 78 cards in a traditional deck. Maybe you are reading for yourself, maybe you're reading for someone else. Assuming that you're actually doing cartomancy, trying to read with the cards, typically we ask some sort of a question, and it might even just be, hey universe, hey galaxy, what do I need to know right now? Hey tarot cards. Statistically, in a randomized world, you're going to get a random assortment of cards. If you've worked with the cards before, you know, however, that they have an uncanny knack for giving you images, symbolism, and stories that is uncannily useful and relevant to your experience. The why of that is beyond the purview of this conversation today. Is it synchronicity? Is everything, do you have a guardian angel helping you with things? Is everything preordained? We all have our views about these things. The important part is that cards can be surprisingly useful. That being said, when the major cards come up in a reading, they typically are there to tell you about the big plot points. If your life were a screenplay, the minor arcana, which is, the 3 of Cups and the 4 of Swords and the 7 of Wands, those cards tend to come up to help you think about some of your day-to-day decisions about, your life, your family, your work, your relationship. The major arcana tend to come up in a reading when you're standing on the edge of really big decisions, really big choices, really big life experiences. And a lot of times those cards come up not so much to ask you what choice you might make, but rather to ask you how you will respond to the things that are going to happen. I'm a firm proponent of the notion that we do have a free will and so forth. We make decisions. You may have predispositions based on your own life experience, your socioeconomic class, your education, your just the way your own life has played out. You may have things that you're prone to, but ultimately, if you don't like what a reading has to say, I like to think that you can say, I don't like that. I don't accept that. What do I need to change in myself, in my circumstances, in order to change the big picture? When the major cards come up, they are really there to say, these are the really big parts. Like if the Tower comes up, here's an example. So my partner and I did a corporate gig reading cards for some bank. It was, some giant conference in January or February. So we're reading cards for, and it was a very festive, fun environment, reading cards for lots and lots and lots of people. They probably have an open bar, and it's going back and forth to see presenters. And yet so many of the people that sat at our table got the same cards. They got the same major cards, and they got the same difficult major cards. They clearly were all on the brink of a similar experience. And standing where we were early this year, we could not imagine what it could be. Well, now we all know, of course, that that would be the pandemic, which is that's a thing we all get to react. We have a certain amount of free will within that. We get to say, you know, am I going to do more yoga or make more cocktails or take classes online or put in a, you know, am I going to agree to put in 1 million hours at work because I'm an essential worker? You have some free will, and yet there's this giant wave moving through your life that is this global experience we all share. So the major cards are like that. They describe really big sort of cosmic forces. So if you sit down and you do a 5-card reading for somebody, and 3 of those cards are major arcana, then you can go, golly, friend, you really have a lot of really big things going on right now. And really encourage them to lean into learning more about what those cards have to offer. I mean, I would say that about all cards. But the first thing you look for is pattern. Is there a lot of something? If there's a lot of major cards, you are dealing with this is an action film that they are looking at. So majors tell you they're like exclamation points, let's say. They're life writ large. Another thing that you can do outside the context of actually reading cards in a you know, cartomantic sense, like where you lay them down and say, hey, tell me something through your patterns that's useful for me. You can also use major cards for something we talked about last week, which is using them for liminal practice. It's like meditative practice. You can do this with all cards, but majors are particularly evocative because they're so archetypal. So you can take them, for example, let's say that you really feel like you need something positive to focus on right now. And so if you spend 10, you get your sun card, your card of festivity, and you spend 10 minutes, really, really absorbing the information in there, really check it out before you go to sleep. Perform your good sleep hygiene, whatever that is, dim your lights, make it easy for yourself to really settle, no screen time. And as you lay there, envision that card as you slip into that liminal state, that is the space, the hypnagogic state, as it's called, between waking and sleeping. That's a great opportunity to sink into the card. You're not doing a tarot reading, you're meditating on that image, and your dreams may be very much enlivened. We talked about this in the second class last week, and a number of you have contacted me to say that that was really useful for you. So if you, and I would encourage you to journal about it. That works great with all the cards, but certainly the majors being, the big, bold superstars of the deck have a lot to offer in that exercise. So where are we at time?
7:39.
Oh, great. Okay, we're doing great on time. Any other questions? Otherwise, we are going to adjourn soon and then come back to the 8 o'clock class. I know some of you have heard some of this information before. I would like to encourage you to, if you're interested in the Rider-Waite deck, which of course is the best known deck of this century, there's a great book called The Waite-Smith Tarot by Tal Goodman and the other person whose name I can't remember right now. I highly encourage you to spend time with that book. It's a great source to really learn some of the symbolism in the Rider-Waite deck. If you are a person who's prone to any kind of alternative spirituality, anything sort of outside the Judeo-Christian sort of dominant paradigm, those things are great. But if you are interested in the alternative spirituality, then I would encourage you to lean into that book. If you're a person of Christian persuasion, it's useful and interesting because the people who made this deck were actually very Christian and really worked hard. As you can see here, we've got the symbolism of the saints worked into it. You see a lot of that symbolism in there that is intended specifically to speak to Christians of a mystical persuasion. And I think that it's also useful for people of a witchy or other persuasion to understand what is in the cards, so that if you decide to make or build your own practice, you can decide whether you want to keep that aspect of the symbolism, because it's not necessary to the tarot, but it is definitely part of the tarot tradition, if that makes sense. You get to pick, in other words. You shouldn't just throw out the baby with the bathwater and go, I don't like these things, anything I don't like goes. That's not the point. With the tarot, we've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of tradition. I encourage you to honor that tradition and study that tradition, but ultimately you want, again, representation. You want to create the mirror of the world that as you see it. So you want to make your tarot practice well-informed and able to reflect perhaps your own values as a person who is aware that they are steeped in hundreds of years. So if the resonance of, these creatures that have come to represent individuals that represent an aspect of the Christian tradition, if that's useful for you and understand the universe, super. Otherwise, you can go, that part doesn't really matter to me, but I can see them as the representations of the 4 sort of cardinal Western elements of, earth, air, water, and fire. So to me, it is important that you always consider finding a mix between being well-informed about why things are the way they are and then making choices. The tarot is an evolving art form. Perhaps in a future class, I'll bring one of the really much older decks from the before times. The art is really interesting, but you will recognize it as a tarot deck. But the difference as the decks have changed over the centuries is notable. And we get to continue that tradition. In my deck, as we will talk about in the next class, the face cards or the court cards, rather than being king, queen, prince, and princess, in my deck, they have evolved to be seer, seeker, sibyl, sage. I just wanted something that would allow those personalities that are traditionally represented to shine through, but just peel away a layer of the history that no longer serves us as people who don't live in a monarchical hierarchy. It's just things should be allowed to shift. So basically what I'm saying is that if you like this sort of thing, there's boundless resources out there for you. And that particular book, the Rider-Waite Smith Tarot book by Tal Goodman and the other guy, is definitely a great resource for understanding everything that is in those cards. Again, I also want to encourage you to check out the Light and Shadow Tarot. I'm going to reach down here and grab the box to show you. I apologize. My chair is a little squeaky here in the studio. So this is the Light and Shadow deck. So good. Particularly, I want to mention that the people cards are just like an old world extravaganza of human-animal interaction. So beautiful. And then if you like my deck, of course, you know where to reach it. I am Madame Ansa, and you can find out more about my deck, my workshops, my practice, and so forth at world.spirit.tarot@gmail.com or theworldspirittarot.com. Oh, and I'm teaching a workshop here locally in Richmond, Virginia. Of course, it's online through RVA, Coven RVA Witches Unite. They're gracious enough to have me work with their community. So I'm doing like a level 2 tarot class with them. Take care.